Hello, my friend. Welcome to another episode of the Help Me Understand podcast, where we cut through the noise of the advice you hear on social media to find advice that actually works. My guest today is a very special guest because it's my brother-in-law, Eric Rubin. I met Eric, I should have done this math before I press record. I met Eric 10 years ago when my mom died. I met Eric because my mom passed away and my sister and Eric came to the house and me and Ollie came to the house. And it was still a fresh relationship. Me and Ollie had been together less than a year. Avery and Eric had been together probably around the same time. So it was a very disjointed whole thing. We got to know I would say just kind of like a lightheaded version of each other. It was very dreamlike that whole time. And then Eric really disappeared from my life until they got married right during the lockdowns in COVID. So I actually went to their wedding. It was outdoors, and it was an awkward experience for me because my sister and I had not been maintaining that much contact with each other really since I had moved out of the house. And this was mostly just because we didn't have a strong relationship to fall back on. It was almost like inertia. We haven't been keeping it up, so we aren't keeping it up. We have no real reason to not keep it up. In fact, I think my sister was probably like, I would really like a relationship with Brenton. And I was the one who was sort of like, yeah, that's fine, but what am I supposed to do? Making the effort it just wasn't computing. Let's put it that way. Okay, so I went to the wedding. And at that point, I realized when we were all taking our family pictures, I had this really emotional wave take over me at that time because I realized that this was my only sister and this is her only wedding, God willing. And I don't really know anything about her. She's kind of a stranger to me. And so that put me on the path of prioritizing our relationship. It's like something needs to happen in order to clarify a priority. So at that point, I started reaching out to her more. And since then, we've been a bigger part of each other's lives. And it's been so amazing. It's been amazing to get to know her as an adult, as someone who lived in the same house with me growing up. And so she has a similar point of reference. And she also had her own coping strategies for making it through that. And so I can see myself a little bit reflected back from her. And I'm able to learn from that a lot to see, oh, here's a different strategy for navigating this intense situation. And of course, Eric is a special type of person for being with her. And the way that Ollie is a special type of person for being with me, and we're all special types of people for being with each other. It's like it's all meant to be. And it was interesting because shortly after their wedding, Eric had kind of two things happen to him in short order. You'll hear all about how he's into parkour. But he had an Achilles injury, like a full-on rupture. And then during the healing process of that, he came out with a nerve issue that went from his shoulder all the way down his arms and into his hands that could produce anything from numbness, tingling, pain, the whole gamut. And that is, jury's still out on exactly what triggered that piece of the pie, but the main suspect right now is that he was walking around on crutches after the Achilles injury. And you'll see, Eric is a very active person, much more so than the Schellenbachs. Me and my sister will be like on the couch And Eric is definitely someone to use his body, to celebrate his body. And so having those two injuries in very short order, I mean, it really took him down for the count. He has something on his lower body, he has something on his upper body. And I remember watching from a distance, because they live far away from us, from a distance, his progression. And I was so inspired by it because he was taking his recovery training so seriously. And he was pretty straightforward with some of the challenges, both psychological and physical, that were happening during the recovery process. But he wasn't letting himself get beat up by them. There's a resilience to Eric that you can feel kind of underscores his character in a way that I think we all have a lot to learn from. Certainly, I think that's one of the qualities in him that my sister finds so attractive. And I was lucky that, I asked Eric to come on the podcast. And of course, he said yes, because he wants to support our efforts over here. And I think that this will be a really important conversation. I know it's an important conversation. We already had the conversation. What you'll get to hear is the logistics of the injuries themselves, because I think that those are always interesting stories to kind of hear the chain of events. Nothing gory. You don't need to prepare yourself for anything like that if you don't want to hear the gory stuff. If you do want to hear the gory stuff, let me know about it. We can maybe get him to share it with us. And you'll get to hear exactly what that recovery process was like. There's all these different stages and phases of the process. From the moment that the injury actually happens, in that split second where you realize, oh crap, to getting the acute part of the injury under control. What do I need to do? I need to get a surgery. I need to go to physical therapy. What kind of physical therapy? To then now the sort of sustained part of the recovery, the lifestyle part. What do you have to give up? What do the people around you need to give up in order to support you on this journey? And what are the mindset shifts that are really imperative to get through if you want to stick with the recovery? How do you get to the side of a successful recovery where you're back to what you were doing before, and maybe you're coming in even hotter? I can't wait for you to hear this episode. So, my conversation with Eric. All right, Eric, let's do this thing. Thank you so much for being here.
So happy to be here.
Oh, okay. I am so excited to talk to you because of your experience with some pretty major injuries. And I know you and I have had a few conversations about what all of that entails, but you do a much better job of telling the story. So could we start by you sharing a little bit about what injuries you've had in the recent past and how that all came to be?
Yeah, sure. So let's see. I guess I'll start for now with my Achilles tendon rupture. That was May of 2022. I was running up a wall, was how I got it. So at least I didn't get it doing something boring. I've been practicing something called parkour for, I guess, like 15 years now or something like that. And I guess I won't just assume that everyone knows what parkour is. I think some people will, some people won't.
Thanks.
It's kind of hard to explain because it's a thing that can be different things to different people. In general, I guess I would say it's a movement practice. I think of yoga as another example of a movement practice that involves moving through an environment and interacting with like the city or nature. It's often running, jumping, climbing, acrobatics, and it can be done for speed and efficiency. It can be done in a more sort of creative or expressive way. A lot of different kind of flavors of it. On this particular day, I was hosting a parkour meetup. There's probably like 25 people there at this university campus. And I was doing, we call it a wall run. I was doing this wall run that I've done many times before. And I was trying to see how fast I could go into it and still carry the momentum, sort of running forward, springing off one foot, going up the wall and pulling myself over all in one fluid motion. How kind of floaty could I get it by really going in fast, and then that foot kicks off the wall and you go upwards. And on, I think like the sixth one on my off side, because I try to make sure I work both sides, my foot was a bit too flat on the wall. And if this is well, I guess some people are just hearing me, but just too much ankle flexion, too much speed, and that thing snapped in two. It's too much of the shin going towards the top of the foot. Too much.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, got it. Yeah. Okay. You didn't have like the springiness in the front of the foot to like kind of push off.
Yeah, I mean,
Um,
basically just too extreme of an angle of
yeah.
the front of the ankle joint closing. It's a lot that your Achilles tendon is doing to rebound you like that, to take all your horizontal and
Mm,
redirect it upwards. And
wow.
it is the classic it's the classic kind of nightmare parkour injury. So I'd seen other people get this injury over the years. I had in various ways tried to prevent against it, but yep, running too fast, technique was a bit off on that one, and I felt the pop. I heard the pop, and I was like, no, because I knew this injury, and I knew I knew that my next like year and a half was going to be a lot of calf raises and rehab, and just I'd seen other people go through how difficult the rehab process on that was. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, so
What
that was
was
the first
going
big moment.
what was going through your head when it happened?
I knew that I had torn my Achilles tendon,
Okay.
and yeah, I hit the ground and I looked down at my foot, which was kind of floppy because I fully tore
Oh,
this,
yeah.
thick tendon that connects your foot to your calf. And I kind of lifted up my shin and I saw my foot flopping like a fish. And yeah, I was just like, no, it happened to me now. And I know I know what's ahead of me. I know how difficult this recovery process is. Yeah, that was kind of the first thing that I was thinking about.
Because you had seen other people in the community have this type of injury, had you seen people recover from it in a really good way?
Yeah, I'd seen some really impressive recoveries from this injury, so
Okay.
that was really helpful. My first thought wasn't like my my athletic career is over. My first thought was
Yeah.
I have so much work ahead of me, because I'd seen that the people who had recovered well just sort of had to become obsessively dedicated to rehabbing from it over a course of, over a year.
Ah, that is so interesting because there's been in a couple of my own injuries that have happened like in a moment, as opposed
Mhm.
to an injury that sort of just creeps up over time.
Right, yeah.
The injuries I've had that were acute, the first place my mind will often go is the catastrophizing
Mm,
pathway, which is not a helpful pathway to go down. And it kind of creates this fear around the injury and about the future. So, like, there's like a lack of optimism there of, oh my gosh, I ruined something forever.
yeah.
It's never going to get better. What is this going to snowball into?
Mm. Oh, I had plenty of
Um,
that, just not in that very first moment. In that very first moment,
right.
I was like, "Oh my God, this is going to be so much work." And then in
Ah,
the coming,
okay.
yeah, yeah.
Say more
Plenty.
about this.
Well, yeah. So I guess, when did I start? I'm sure that within 24 hours, I was already starting to do that. I mean, it's been a ton of me having to
Mm,
take myself, and I guess in that first couple weeks, there was a lot of me time traveling to the past and future, thinking about what if I hadn't done that,
yeah.
like the regret of it, but then also, and how could I have avoided it, and that kind of thing. And then also just what does this mean for the future in various ways. And I think it was as I got deeper into the recovery that I had more of that anxiety about what the eventual outcome would be. I started looking at stats on recovery from the injury and seeing some stuff that was pretty bleak. I had been sort of focused on these set of people who I knew who had made good recoveries, but the more I learned, I saw how not at all guaranteed that was. And then if we fast forward even further, there was periods where I was just kind of behind in my progress on it, and I think 3 months where I wasn't making like any progress on my single leg calf raise. So there's plenty of times in that where I was really struggling to not catastrophize about having wrecked my lower leg forever, and um, I won't get to this place of recovery that I want to. It's just that very first moment that I was, I guess, just focused on the hard work of it.
Yeah, well, and now that I'm thinking about it, that makes sense. Like, you need almost a sense of it's going to be okay when it initially happens because it's so jarring. It's like, my foot is not supposed to do that. Is
Yeah,
this even a foot anymore?
yeah,
Am I
yeah.
a person anymore? Like,
Right.
when I dislocated my knee and I saw my patella move to the side, it really, like, within a split second, it wasn't like I was consciously thinking like this, but there was all of a sudden all of these questions about the stability of my existence at like
Right.
a very deep level. And so I think then maybe it's natural for there to be some sort of calming mechanism that comes in that's like, hey, this is okay. It's an Achilles rupture. Yes, this is
Yeah.
not ideal. However, this
We'll get,
happens.
yeah, yeah, right, right. Yeah.
And then you get hit with the reality of recovery, because it's
Hmm.
one thing to know that the journey is hard, but then
Hmm.
it's another thing entirely to encounter the actual hard part of the journey.
Right. And then I guess compounding all this, I should probably bring in that was the first major injury, but then maybe,
Yes.
oh, maybe it was 5 weeks later, maybe 4 weeks later, I started getting upper body nerve symptoms. And it was like first I was waking up with my hands being numb, then it was kind of spreading up to my arm, then my neck was getting tight.
Oh.
Then I was having these circulatory symptoms in my hands where my hands would get too full of blood. They'd be like purple and aching when they were down by my sides. And this basically mysterious and for a bit progressive set of nerve and vascular symptoms with my upper body, which eventually it took a while and some imaging and some finding experts. We found out what it was. It's this thing called thoracic outlet syndrome, which is basically where there's a bundle of nerves and veins that runs from your neck, under your collarbone, through your armpit, down to your arms and hands. And that whole kind of tunnel that the nerves and the veins run through, it's called the thoracic outlet, the tunnel that goes neck, under the collarbone, through the armpit. And somehow, and I guess I'll double back to this a little bit, somehow those nerves and veins on both sides of my body were getting compressed in a way that was causing numbness, nerve pain, circulatory symptoms. And yeah, I guess I still don't totally know how exactly this came to be. It seems like it's a mix of the kind of acute stress of that whole period and
Mhm.
using crutches because I couldn't walk and I had to be bearing my weight on crutches. And then I was also I was trying to focus on what I could do. So I was like, great, I'll just work out my upper body more while my lower body's recovering. I don't have time for the same kind of like stretching and recovery that I used to do. So somehow that combination of things created sort of a perfect storm. Oh, and eventually when I got imaging, we saw that I was sort of anatomically predisposed to this. But yeah, all of that together just put me in the position where my lower body and my upper body were not able to do basic stuff. And I went from, a month and a half before that, jumping between things and diving onto my hands and climbing up walls to, okay, I can't walk. I can't sleep for more than an hour in a row. I can't lift groceries, in just all these things that were yeah, just really basic stuff is I've never been
Wow.
disabled before.
What a huge pendulum shift. What kind of imaging allowed you to diagnose the thoracic outlet syndrome?
Uh, okay, it's an MRI, but then they also do a dye that goes into your veins and then circulates through. It's really weird. It feels very cold as you can feel it going through, and I guess it's like an MRI with contrast. But yeah,
Interesting.
I was in this MRI for 40 minutes with my arms down and then my arms up, and they were seeing where are things getting squished.
Okay. And so this situation puts you in a place where, I mean, at that point, you had to have surgery on the Achilles to connect it back together, right?
I had already had surgery on the
Okay.
Achilles really soon after it happened. I Yeah, made that decision pretty quick. Not without angst, because there's pros and cons to both sides. But I made the decision to get surgery for the Achilles, and
Mm,
then I made the decision not to get the surgery that they sometimes do for thoracic outlet syndrome. There's different surgeries they can do, but sometimes they take out your first ribs. Sometimes they remove a neck muscle. On that one, I
interesting.
said no. I'm going to try just rehabbing them.
Okay. Just to try to create the space necessary so that bundle of nerves is not compressed anymore.
Yeah,
Is
it's like,
that
how are we
what it
going to make this
is?
space? Are we going to take
Mm-hmm.
a muscle and cut it so that it's no longer creating tightness? Are we going to take a bone out? Or we
Right.
can try to just sort of uh, change the relative tension of the muscles through rehab and open up the space.
Mm,
I was like,
mm.
I'm not gonna go surgery on this without putting a good college try into. Yeah, what's my thought on that one?
I mean, yeah, the moment you're talking about like altering your skeleton, it's like
But,
maybe I
yeah,
could, maybe there's like some muscle restriction I can clear up through exercise or
right,
just diligence in how I position myself.
right. So I found a physical therapist who specialized in thoracic outlet syndrome,
Okay.
and he said to me, he's like, "Well, the good news is I do think that you have a solid chance of being able to get a lot better with physical therapy. The bad news is it's a lot of work. Like, this is not, you have to really dedicate yourself to this, and it has to be your priority." And I laughed. I was like, okay, that's funny. That's what my Achilles tendon physical therapist said as well. Great.
Yeah. Okay. So this is a great segue because I'm so interested. It sounds like you had like two tracks of recovery,
Hmm.
one for the leg and one
Hmm.
for the upper body.
Right.
So what did those tracks look like, including, I'm so curious, like it seems like you had good help throughout this process, which is
Hmm.
sometimes difficult to find. So, how did even the approach go to finding the right people to work with to set those recovery tracks in progress?
Yeah. So I think that is a classic thing that I do is I try to research things and I try to find someone who can help me out, and sometimes an expert if I can find an expert. I also am just like really lucky in a number of ways, including I happen to live within 20 minutes of a thoracic outlet syndrome physical therapy expert who I found a website that was like thoracic. I should know the name of it, but it was tosawareness.com or something like that. And they
Sure.
had like a list of specialists around the country, and one of them was 20 minutes away from me. So I was able to and took my insurance. So I got really lucky with that one.
Wow.
Yeah. And then with the Achilles tendon, how did I find this guy? I mean, just internet research. I found somebody who specializes in online coaching for athletes who are trying to return to sport after an Achilles tendon rupture.
Ah, so specific.
It's really specific, right? In both cases, I was like, I really want to find. And then I also, over the years, my friend and this guy named Jim Donak, who is a manual therapist and teaches movement education and does all kinds of things in that vein, often like circus artists and different people.
Mm,
He's helped me fix myself in the past, and he was helping guide me through this too. So I really tried to find some experts and get them in my court.
okay. And so you alluded to like, the good news is that this is fixable. The bad news is it's
Fixable,
going to take
probably. Right.
Fixable, probably. The good
Or
news
improvable,
is,
probably. Nobody wants to say, nobody wants to overpromise, you know?
yeah, exactly. No promissory language.
Yeah.
But the bad news is it's going to take a whole lot of work.
Right.
So, what does that whole lot of work look like?
Um, Different looking work for the two. For
Yeah.
the Achilles tendon, my God, I did a lot of calf raises and like calf exercises. You're initially just needing to get back to being able to stand and then walk. And then just a lot of the rehab is going to involve progressive strength training, essentially, of the lower leg, of your calf.
Hmm.
And then from there, it's like little, little hopping and jogging and running and jumping and all those things. Um, for the nerve injury, that's more complicated. I went to that guy who's a specialist, and they have this whole protocol that they've come up with, and the first 2 months or something, quite a while, it just involves really simple stuff. It's a lot of just letting things kind of reset and relax and open up. So there's a kind of a postural component, but there's a lot of breathing exercises. Um, at the very beginning, I'm just laying on the ground with my arms supported on pillows to really like make sure there's no tension in the whole area, and just focusing on breathing and relaxing and these kind of gentle spinal motions. And there's like a self massage component, and that I did for a while. And really, I think in some ways it was different from other rehab I've done. So much of the rehab I've done
Hmm.
is about kind of progressively challenging something. And that
Hmm.
it was a little nerve wracking for me, actually, because so much of what I was doing was not doing stuff. It is more,
Hmm.
uh, I guess, yin and the yin yang. And I did this for quite a while, trying to just let the body heal and let things open up. And I could see myself getting weaker, and like I was doing less and less in some ways. And then eventually I felt like I took that as far as it could take me. And I started trying to apply more of the approach I usually take, of trying to sort of progressively build things up and introduce more movement, um, taking all the different capacities that I wanted to rebuild and finding my entry point and trying to scale this up. That's ultimately what's been super effective for me. But I think probably it was good that I did that first long period of just letting everything reset and relax before I took that approach.
Interesting. So it sounds like at the beginning, it was mostly like really isolated in your calf, like doing those types of movements,
Hmm.
paired with, I mean, I would almost call this like somatics.
Yeah. The lower
The
body is very like, there is this one joint, right? And it's
and
like,
we're and we're
we're handling this one very isolated piece, and it's very
area.
mechanical. It's like we got to put load through the tendon. And the upper body was
Mm.
like, okay, there's going to be a meditation and postural and like, just much more complex. Overall, I thought that's how I felt about the two, is that the lower body has actually been the more linear, sometimes with plateaus, but so I guess that's not totally linear, but been the more straightforward of the two.
Interesting, interesting. And so it sounds like your life looked a lot different before and after.
Yeah.
And how, because there's one thing of like going to work with the specialist and do things there, but then now you have homework or you have lifestyle changes
Hmm.
that you need to make. So what did those end up looking like for you and your recovery process?
Yeah. Um, well, I guess the homework was extensive. That was, sometimes it felt ridiculous. I think by finding somebody who really is an expert in a thing, you sometimes get a very intense approach. So yeah, just I had this app from my Achilles physical therapist, and there was a ton of different exercises there. And then also a whole list of exercises from the TOS, thoracic outlet syndrome physical therapist. And then also, yeah, lifestyle stuff. I'm not sitting with perfect posture right now, but for a very long time, I tried to always be mindful of my posture. I was supposed to walk 3 miles a day. I had to have my hands supported in some way because otherwise the blood was pooling in them. So I was always had my hands in my pockets or in some other way, sort of like resting on a table or something. Um, yeah, just anyway, a lot of lifestyle changes. It was and among other things, there was just a whole almost year of my life where I I feel like rehab was the big thing I was doing. And so that
Yeah.
was tough in a lot of ways, just the how much of a slice of my life pie that was.
Yeah. How did the psychology work throughout that period?
Um, I think that was one of the things I realized pretty quickly was that it was going to be maybe even more mental than physical. So
Mhm.
I, I got this book called Rebound about the kind of
Mm.
psychology of injury recovery. And I started listening to podcasts in this kind of general vein and like trying to figure out how to adapt psychologically to it as well. I think it's a slight change in plans as an example of a podcast that I was listening to, which is not really about injury exactly, but it's about people whose lives suddenly change in some way and how they adapt to that. So I don't know. There's probably a lot of different strands that we could pull on. I think one of the things you were saying earlier really resonated for me, that just trying to stay in the present aspect, not trying to think about the past and how we got there or where is it going to end up, but just kind of one day at a time. What's the thing that I can do right now? I read this book by ultra runner who fell off a mountain and was horribly injured. Yeah, named Hillary Allen. And I remember she said that the way that she thought about it was she's sort of building a brick house of her recovery. And every day she would lay a brick. And each brick didn't need to be perfect. But the important thing was just to keep laying bricks. And so I think anyway, that resonates with me as a lot of what I was trying to do is just kind of have some rituals and just do it each day. And I guess also know that this will pass, but I just got to stay focused on what I can do right now.
Yeah. What did you have to sacrifice during that time?
Um, I guess a lot of what I was sacrificing was being able to kind of connect with other people and do things that,
Mm.
because some of it was just imposed, right? Parkour is this very community oriented thing where we come together and practice
Yeah.
this thing that we love together. So separated from that, but also just the kind of time commitment of it. So a lot of what I was doing was listening to podcasts, watching TV or movies, doing rehab, that kind of thing. Also, just a lot of it was getting support from different people and being able to appreciate that support. Like every time there's heavy groceries, my wife is the one who is carrying those groceries. Or we had just moved, and so it's like, who's going to move the furniture? Who's going to put the box up on the shelf? Like, there's so many things that I had
My
to
poor
I
sister.
can,
We
yeah,
should bring her on. Be like, Avery, what did you have to sacrifice
yeah.
for
And I should ask
Eric's
her.
injury?
She had to pick up a lot of slack, and um, yeah, I'm very grateful for it. Yeah, there's periods where my coworkers had to pick up slack too. I mean, there was a period where I wasn't typing,
Yeah.
so I was just doing dictation, and I was having trouble sleeping. And um, definitely everybody on my team stepped up to help out. So a lot
Gosh.
of how this has worked has been that I've just gotten a lot of support from people to help me through it.
Yeah. I like the idea of it's being adapting to really big life changes because every aspect of your life shifted with this. And so there's almost like a mourning for all of the good
Mm.
parts of the way that life was that
Yeah.
are no longer here. And maybe almost a frustration with some of the boring parts or the
I'm
confusing
gonna take away
parts
that
of the
maybe,
present.
but yeah. No, I definitely was like the definitely was frustrated with that. But yeah, the grief aspect that you said, I think, is so true. This grieving for the version of my life that didn't
Mm,
exist anymore and maybe wouldn't. And then I think one thing that was really tough, you said, was the psychology of it. I think one thing that was tough was the kind of narrative aspect of it, trying to figure out what my
yes.
story of myself and my life was. It,
Mm-hmm.
and there's layers to that, but one layer of it was I found myself, especially maybe month 12, month 15, deeper into it, not being sure, is this like a comeback story or is this an adapt to a change that's too big to just go back to the way it was story? And I feel like those were the two big narratives that I hear most often was, so either it's the, we're coming back to 110%, nothing can stop me. I'm sure that I'm gonna be just like I was, but better. That's like one story that's often celebrated and which you hear. And then another story is you get in a car accident and you have a spinal cord injury and now you can't walk, but that person adapts to that and still finds a way to shift their identity and live a full thriving life. And that's another story to celebrate. And I think some of what was really tripping me up for a while was just trying to understand, trying to put myself in one camp or the other and not knowing, not knowing how things would play out and having to be like,
Where
okay, I guess I'm just gonna keep laying bricks and be okay and have and be able to accept that if it doesn't get better or doesn't get a lot better, then I'll find a way to thrive. And if it does, that's great too. But being able to like be in the uncertainty of that.
interesting. So am I hear you saying that it's almost like you had to let go of both stories and at the same time be open to both stories being your future?
Yeah, exactly. I think you distilled it well. It's like I couldn't get attached to have to make this
Yes.
full comeback and be just like I was. But I also didn't want to say, okay, I accept this and the I have the courage to let go of all those things and just find new things. So
Mm,
I'm like not trying to do either of those. I'm trying to keep trying to regain what capability I can, but be open to it like being a transformation instead of a comeback. I don't
mhm.
it's hard to kind of condense because it's like
Yeah.
almost a paradox of how do you want something but not get too attached to it? How do you right? It's classic stuff
Yeah.
in some ways.
Right, yeah. That's interesting because I think there's a story that I get stuck in sometimes, which is it's never gonna get better.
Mm.
Did you ever get close to that type of story or like a dark story that you then had to figure out how to power your way out of?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think mentally there were so many periods where it was just sort of a constant process of drifting off into the place and then trying to be like, hey, what are we doing over here? Let's go back,
Uh,
kind of like
yeah.
catching that thing like, hey, that's actually just a story that you've come up with, like let's go back to what you can control.
Mm,
Yeah, and so not that, and then it's just drifting less often and for less long. I think it reminds me of meditation.
yeah. For sure, for sure. I can feel that absolutely where I and like honestly, there's times where I'll get stuck in that story for months at a
Hmm.
time where it'll just feel kind of yucky and it's yucky to be around me and Ollie doesn't really want to have anything to do with me at that point because I'm just like being a sourpuss about everything. But at some point there's almost like this critical moment where it's like this recognition of, well, I can't live in this story forever.
Yeah.
So I need to now shift into this other place. And I will say that now being 36 years old and having enough like repetitions of that
Hmm.
cycle of things, I usually don't get stuck in that story for months anymore.
Yeah.
Usually it's, and it depends on the situation as well. Like, what is the challenge that the universe has put in front of me to endure this time?
Yeah.
Will
It's
kind
interesting
of,
how you say that like with time and practice, you're getting better at that. I feel like the practice is so helpful, especially if you can like
mm,
look back at, okay, this is like the time that I tore my hamstring and remember that that seemed so dark in the beginning, but then it ended up being okay. And it's like every time we
mm,
go through these things, we give ourselves another experience to potentially draw upon in the future and I guess get more practice with it. Think about how well practiced
totally.
we're going to be by the time that we're in our 50s or 70s and have gone through whatever injuries lie ahead of us.
Yeah, that's such a cool way of looking at it. Like on that note, what do you think you've learned from this that you wouldn't know otherwise if you hadn't gone through this?
Hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because I had injuries before, both acute and chronic, that I learned stuff from. So in some ways, I
Yeah.
remember tearing my Achilles tendon and being like, I don't need to learn this lesson again. You know, I've already done
Ah.
this. Um, and yet, I do think that with these injuries and with the two of them compounded, there were new lessons to learn. Um, I think some of what I learned from this was around accepting uncertainty and
Mm,
what we were saying earlier about, I think in the past it had been more of like the just comeback mentality and like a real rigid, I know who I am, this is my vision for my life, I'm just going to you know fix it. And so this,
yep.
I guess, opened me up more to being like, oh, how else could I be, what else could my life be about if this stuff really isn't available. I i read a book that was called Life is Hard, How Philosophy Can Help, or something like that. And the author, who has a chronic pain condition and disability, was talking about disability in some ways that really, I guess, expanded my perspective. And I think really it made me more open to the sort of infinite ways that a person can be and the sort of infinite set of things that you can do in life. I think
Mhm.
before this, I was more attached to the way I was and the things that I liked. And I'm like, I know who I am. I know what I like to do. I'm just going to keep making that happen. And kind of having to reckon with the possibility that some of these things might be taken in a way that like I can't just power through potentially, made me have to be like, okay, so am I just gonna be sad for the rest of my life that I can't do a push-up anymore and I can't, whatever? Or am I going to like learn to sing or, you know, get more involved in other communities or, find more fulfillment through mentorship in my work, or just, there's so many things to do with your
Mhm.
body, but also in life. And I think so that was helpful, just kind of an opening up to ad- adapting in terms of what is still available. I think just
Mhm.
to go off that a little bit more, this idea that really occurred to me through these injuries is, I guess I realized I was getting really focused on the stuff I couldn't do. I was getting really focused. Can't do my full calf raise yet. I I can't hang from a bar. I can't. I used to be able to do this, and I can't do that. And I was really focused on the things that weren't available. And then I realized that, like, oh, I'm so much happier when I focus more on, honestly, the infinite things. 'Cause the infinite things I can't do, but there's still infinite things that I can do. And the more I focus on those and enjoy, start doing Tai Chi, like all these things I wouldn't even do before, that made me happier. And I found this like kind of secret sauce for me was to be happy, focus on the things you can do, to expand your capacities, focus on the edge of what you can do.
Mhm.
And that kind of, that really worked for me. And I think it's a lesson I'll take from here, that duality.
Mhm. Yeah, that's gosh, that's so amazing. Uh, It reminds me of Ollie and I were in the woods this weekend talking about perfectionism
Hmm.
and how we both struggle with different various versions of it.
Yeah.
But there was a really great book that I had read that was very helpful to me called The Gap and the Gain.
Hmm.
And it's like, okay, well, when you're a perfectionist, you are obsessing over the gap that is between where you are and where you want to be.
Right.
But happy people focus on the gains. Like, what have I
Mhm.
just accomplished, the little bitty tiny things versus where I started from?
Right.
Now, in the case of an injury, it's kind of interesting because you had capacity, then you lost it. Now you're kind of
Hmm.
comparing that delta and you're like, gosh, but I would say like the injury itself is the new reality. And
Right.
so it's like any little gain in that space is the thing to pay attention to and to
Hmm.
celebrate. And if you're going to be obsessing over the gap ahead of you, I just want to get back to the push up. It's going to
Hmm.
be a pretty miserable ride. You might even, I don't know if you can get back to the push up like that. Maybe you can.
Yeah. I think it's some people just then give up. Right.
Yeah.
I think I love what you said about what's your reference point? Are you just going to keep focusing on where you used to be, or are you going to focus on where you were a week ago, a month ago, whatever? I think that you're kind of naming something that I really leaned into, but I haven't really mentioned yet. It's just this huge focus on incremental progress. And
Mhm.
I think, like you said, really helpful to celebrate all those little wins. Like,
Mm.
for example, to get back to my single leg calf raise, I I set up this like system where I had a pulley that was giving me weight assistance, so I could measure to see how many pounds of assistance do I need to do the calf raise. And so I could be like, okay, I need 120 pounds of assistance. Damn, that's not good. But now I'm at 110. Now I'm at 100, and over the course of, I think it took me 9 months to get back to that. But I was able to chip away, and I was able to say, I'd come back from the gym and I'd say, Avery, plus 10 pounds or minus 10 pounds, however you want to think about it, instead of saying
Nice.
I used to be able to do this super easily.
Mm. And I love that you ritualized it with Avery. Now
Yeah.
she's part of it. Well, yeah, and it's like
Yeah.
it probably feels better that way than to just say it to yourself when you look in the mirror at the gym.
Right. Well, and I had this, I made this Instagram recovery account, and
Mm.
that was psychologically helpful in a number of ways. One is I was posting all my progress, and it gave me a little place to be like, and now I can wiggle my toes was my first one. But, and then every little piece I can celebrate there and focus on this incremental gains. But then also so that connected me to a lot of different people who had torn their Achilles tendons. And my original thought was I want to record this whole process for the next me who comes along, the next parkour friend who tears their Achilles tendon, because I know it will happen. And doing it, having something that you're like, well, this is for someone else as well, can be really helpful. At least for me, when I felt like I didn't want to do it, trying to find what are the aspects of this that are external motivation or helpful for other people helped. And then just, there's other people who are celebrating along the way and saying, great job, and there's not just Avery, it was this whole kind of online community of people.
Gosh, that's so cool. Celebrating the progress, tracking the progress, even. Like,
Yeah.
that's so cool with the Instagram account. And so the
Hmm.
tracking is probably helpful in and of itself. But then on top of that, there's the community aspect.
Yeah.
I can see how that could start to kind of create some positive momentum in a recovery process where it's almost making life feel maybe a little bit fun and purposeful again, even in the midst of this crazy change that just happened.
Right. There's a new journey, there's a new quest, there's a new
Yeah.
story. It's the
And it's like
injury
we're okay with
recovery
the
arc
quest.
or adaptation arc or whatever it is.
Yeah, totally. So, were there other elements that made it fun for you? Other things that you learned like that?
Yeah. I mean, I think that was very necessary because of how boring and repetitive and slow some of the aspects would be otherwise, but it's also just, I guess it's something I feel like I've learned from parkour as well. Parkour, you go into a space and you try to imagine what the possibilities are for what challenges you could do in that space, how you could interact with the environment. And there's like a creative physical aspect to it. And I think in the same way, I got pretty mad scientist with my rehab, and I tried to be like, okay, how many ways can I find to build strength in the calf? You know, are there like other activities that I can do? Can I turn this like hopping exercise into sort of like a fun dance thing, or can I do hiking? But also just getting interested in the rehab exercises themselves, like trying to do them at different angles or trying to find different setups that really, give me that mind muscle connection to be able to get that calf to turn back online. Like getting,
Yeah.
and this is maybe just my personality, but um, getting interested in the physical therapy itself and its nuances made it
Yeah.
less like a chore, still a chore, but more like something that I was kind of experimenting with and investigating.
Gosh, that's so cool. Uh, I think like I'm the type of person who, I remember going to the gym in like high school or something. Like my mom got us gym memberships, and I would kind of try to zone out what I was doing.
Mm.
So if I'm on the elliptical, I'm like trying to not feel my bodily sensations
Hmm.
because the act of exercise is uncomfortable.
Right.
And this started long before that, even in gym class that I was always trying to avoid and was like my worst subject in school. I was good through pretty much recess because
Hmm.
recess was like unstructured,
Hmm.
and so I could choose what I wanted to do. And even sometimes then I was like, I'll create a snack circle and we'll all trade snacks during recess
Yeah.
instead of like go do, monkey bar stuff.
Hmm.
So, I just think I am the type of person who exercise is not a natural proclivity. It's not a natural interest. It's more of an acquired taste over time. And I've really had to learn as a skill how to drop into what I'm doing with my attention and to pay attention actually and engage with the thing, because my default is, oh, I'm on a hike, this is burning my legs, let me zone that out and let me think about something else
Mm.
and
Yeah.
not get into the feeling of it. And it's only been over the last, even well into my yoga, that it was sort of like this.
Hmm.
I was able to tolerate like the really yummy feeling stuff, but when things started to feel intense, it was when my attention sort of left the building. And so it hasn't been until the last few years that I've really learned how to dial in. And I'm like, oh, what is the mechanism that allows me to pay attention is interest. It's
Right.
actually like the interest in the thing itself. And the only difference between me being interested in it and not interested in it, honestly, it's like at a story level. It's
Mm.
like I'm telling myself I'm the type of person who's not interested in these things, who doesn't like these things, and therefore I don't. But if I can just catch myself and say, hey, you're interested in this, pay attention, it's like right there for me to be interested in and pay attention to. It doesn't need more magic than me just shifting the story.
Right. That's really interesting. I think I agree. I'm the same way, that I find that bringing an interest to the movement I'm doing just makes it much more motivating. I think sometimes you gotta, maybe some people will just need to power through and just build a habit first, and maybe they'll need to just zone out to, get used to doing the
Mm.
elliptical. But it's a nice way to be if you can get to that place of actually enjoying being present with it. I think what you said about the story being helpful there resonates with me too, because I think one of the things that I've kind of was able to bring into this was the way that parkour practice gave me these sort of embodied metaphors and stories about myself that I could then
Mhm.
bring into the rehab process. So like
Totally.
for example, well, one aspect of parkour community is, especially back in the day when I started is we do these kind of grueling physical exercise sessions together, like
Mm-hmm.
hours of crawling on the pavement or shuffling along on the edge of a wall. And they're not actually the best way to work out, and they are somewhat injury inducing, but they I think the value in them is that they are this way of, how do I say it? It's like teaches you that you're the kind of person who can do hard things in a way that's very vivid. You can call upon that, and you can be like, oh, this thing that I'm slogging through, this is like when I was crawling across the pavement with the Cal Parkour group, whatever
Mm-hmm.
thing you're drawing on. Or if it wasn't that, if it was, running, you'd be like, okay, this this cleaning the whole garage thing, this like 3-day project that's hours and hours, whatever. This is like the time that I did that super long run, and the last couple of miles I just had to slog through. So I think there's interesting thing, because then you're like, I'm the kind of person who can do that, and I feel like in some ways, some of the value for me in parkour practice has been to have a little way of practicing building certain attributes, and then being able to call on that story, like, oh, I'm a person who's like that, and this is like having the courage to jump between those two things, or something like that.
Wow. So parkour actually set you up so that when the injury happened, you had a bank of stories that you could
Hmm.
call upon about the type of person you were, that reinforced the idea that you are capable,
Hmm.
that you can overcome challenges, that you can learn new things and
Right.
get good at them.
Hmm.
So you
And then
had
like
these
baby steps
stories.
can add up, all those things.
Baby steps can add up.
Right.
Totally. Okay. So that's already creating like the given mental territory that you're in when the injury happens, which I think is so key because, I see a lot of people who have sort of chronic injuries where that
Hmm.
gets, tricky because it's like, well, where did it come from? And, what did I do? And when it's kind of sneaks up on you, getting help at some point seems like, well, when is that threshold when I
Right.
should actually go do this? Like when it's acute, it's like obvious, like I need to get
Hmm.
in an ambulance. Like
Yeah.
my foot is flopping around.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
when does this shoulder pain that just
Hmm.
shows up randomly 3 times a week, when does that merit me going and talking to somebody about it? And I think a lot of times the we get into those kinds of injuries, and one, like, we're not super motivated to recover from this so that we can restore some capacity in ourselves. Like you also had a parkour practice that
Hmm.
then motivated you. You were like, I want to get back to that. So
Right.
this is a pretty strong reason for you to show up to your recovery path and to change your lifestyle around and make these sacrifices. That's a big enough thing that now it makes sense. And so when I see these the the kind of, let's say, a different segment of people for whom, there is no physical goal at the end of it besides just, I want to feel better. I don't want
Hmm.
to wake up with aches and pains. um that's so interesting because that person maybe doesn't have that set of stories to call upon, your parkour set of stories of I am capable and I can do this.
Yeah, they're
And
playing on hard mode in some ways, right? Like in some ways, it was easier for me because I'm like, I have this thing that's
mm,
really drawing me back. I have lots of experience with physicality, and
yeah.
I have, yeah, just like you said, those kind of stories about, okay, I'm capable, and I understand how baby steps can add up and all those things. I mean, it's way harder if you're somebody who, like you were just describing, has an injury, not in the habit of using your body, don't have something that's really giving you a strong pull to come back to, maybe doesn't have confidence that physical therapy. I mean, I was such a believer in
Mm,
that this thing can work, but you don't necessarily believe it can work. Maybe,
yeah.
don't believe that doctors are help. There's, as hard as my situation was, I did have a lot of things stacked in my favor as well.
Mm.
And I'm also just a pretty deep dive person who, I can be obsessive, which is a weakness and a strength. So
Yeah.
there's definitely ways in which I wouldn't be like, oh yeah, everyone can just do it just like I did, make a
Mm.
make a spreadsheet where you track every week and how where you are across these 6 movement capabilities. Like not everyone's gonna.
Right, exactly. They're like movement capabilities.
Sure.
What are you talking about? That's so funny. Well, I mean, you and I both have people like that in our lives of,
I think a lot of
who
people, that's not a rare
that's,
person.
yeah,
A regular
exactly.
person
So,
probably.
yeah, right. It's like, I'm just living my life over here, man. I'm a software engineer, and gosh, I just
Mhm.
don't want my shoulder to hurt anymore. And like,
Yeah.
right. And so what have you learned that you think is like particularly useful regarding that situation?
I think that the incremental progress and just focusing on consistently doing the thing is really the key. I'm not sure. Maybe we'll figure this out together. Like, how do you do that? I think there's a motivational component, but I think the key thing that I would recommend to so many people is to just focus on figuring out what can you do right now, kind of mapping that out, and not just being really broad, like, oh, I have an injury, so I can't do anything.
Mhm.
What can I do? Okay, where is the boundary of what I can't do? Figuring out where that line is. Where is that line
What
for?
can I do? And is there like without pain or with?
Yeah, that's what I mean. It kind of
Okay.
depends on the injury, but
Okay.
without bad pain, right?
Okay. Bad pain. Yeah.
Yeah, without it being too much, or without. It depends on the thing. But like, where is my edge across different activities? How do I make sure that I'm not overly staying away from things? Because
Yes.
sometimes people assume, oh, my shoulder hurts, I can't do anything with my shoulder. It's like, actually, maybe you
Yes.
can do all sorts of things with your shoulder as long as it's below this level, or as long as it's pushing but not pulling. Or so what
Mm-hmm.
actually can you do? What can you not do? And then for the things that you can't do, I mean, find an expert, right? But find someone to help you. But then just keep consistently making incremental progress on that edge and figure out the entry point. What's the thing that you can do? And then just, if you stick with moving in the direction of what you want to be able to do, just very incrementally, I think that's a huge part of it. But then,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
then that comes to, but then how do you have the motivation to keep doing that? Because it often takes a lot longer to consistently
Right.
get something to heal. And it's very rarely just you keep stacking progress. It's sometimes 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So that's a tough component.
Mm.
If someone had the motivation, I think that's the biggest thing that I would recommend, is to kind of map out what you can and can't do, and then just keep stacking incremental progress on the areas where you're trying to get back, and focus on the process goal of, I'm going to just do my rehab, whatever, 2 days a week, and then maybe move that up to 3 days a week, or and don't get too attached to, I have to get this outcome in this time frame. But if you focus on the habit of the rehab, and if that rehab continues to stay focused on stacking little bits of progress in the direction you want to go over weeks and months, and sometimes it's even years, it's amazing how much progress someone can make.
Mm. I love the idea of setting a process goal. I've never thought about it like that.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, with my nerve stuff, I felt, and actually with both of them, I felt like I can't really control the outcome. So if
Yeah.
I set outcome goals, I mean, I sometimes
Yeah.
I would say, like, I want to, in this month, see if I can get 10 pounds less assistance on the calf raise. But
Okay.
ultimately, like, I can't control that. What I can control is, how many times am I going to the gym and working hard at the edge of my ability.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned two steps forward, one step back. Earlier, you
Mhm.
talked about plateaus. What's salient for you in that whole space?
Um, those are both hard. Plateaus are
Yeah.
hard. They're scary because it's like, is this it? And if you're plateaued in a place that feels unacceptable, then that's scary and difficult. Going forward and back is tough too. I mean, the regression is scary because you're like, there have been periods with my nerve injury where I'm like, oh no, am I heading down a slope that's going to keep going and going? And I guess in both those cases, the hard thing about them for me psychologically is if you start getting into a longer term idea about it, and I guess that comes back to what you said at the very beginning. It's the more you're thinking about the future or the past, the harder it is.
Mhm.
In that rebound book, they talk about accept, adapt, act as like these three A's. And I feel like those are nice three A's to pull from in situations like that. Um, okay, this is happening. I'm plateaued or I'm having a flare up or a regression or whatever. I can't really, I can put energy into being like, no, this is stupid. I'm trying so hard. What did I do wrong? Whatever. But
Mhm.
that is the situation. And then, okay, so how am I going to adapt to this? How am I going to change my strategy, or how am I going to focus on what I still can do? And then what act is like, what can I control about it? What is within my power, and what are the next steps that I can take? Because that's just all
Mm.
yeah, because that's all you can do.
I love that. That's such a easy to remember tool. Accept, adapt, act. And I could even maybe like generalize that even further to like any time I notice that something is not going my way.
Hmm. I think a lot of the stuff about injuries are not just about injuries, and
Yeah.
that's interesting. Another thing that I've thought about with this that I think is not just about injuries is asking what are the gifts in this bad thing.
Mhm. Mhm.
It's bad. I'm not trying to say it's not bad, whatever the thing is,
Right.
but also what are the gifts in it? Um, and I think one of the gifts of injuries are that they teach you stuff that you can then apply in other places.
Mm.
I guess
Mm.
just like I was saying, how parkour teaches you stuff that you can apply elsewhere. It's like injuries are also, while not fun, they're like a lesson in things like accept, adapt, and act, for example.
Yeah. Uh, do you have any other examples of the gifts of your injuries?
Mm, I think what I was saying earlier, yeah, some of the stuff I've mentioned, I guess one that I haven't mentioned is just I have so much gratitude for simple things that I didn't have before. Like
Mm.
walking is awesome. If you can if you can walk, it's like so lucky, really
Yeah.
wonderful. Probably will never stop. I don't know because it's
Mm.
been 27 months since I tore my Achilles tendon, and I'm so very grateful for
Well,
walking. So I think it's stuck at this point. There was a period where walking was one of the main things that I could do physically, and so I started like taking more photos of. I would go on neighborhood walks, and I would take photos of a bit of the city that I thought was pretty, some patterns in the bricks with their shadow, or a super close up of. There's so many cool things in nature, like plants, amazing, insects, amazing, so many cool things. But
wow.
yeah, I guess just a lot more appreciation for simple things like um, being able to not just not having to think about my nerve injury all the time. It's so much mental load when you actually have more significant injury or disability like that. I mean, I feel like I never had as bad of symptoms as many people do with thoracic outlet syndrome. It can get really rough. So I'm
Mhm.
not trying to say that I have like that full appreciation, but I do have more of a window now into how tough it can be to live with like a chronic pain condition or a disability, that also a hidden disability, one where you look fine from the outside, but there's just so many limitations you have that other people aren't cognizant of. And just as I've made so much progress in my recovery, it's I feel so lucky to be as able-bodied as I am, and to be not having to think about this thing all the time, to not have to like, I have to do my rehab every day or else, it's there's a lot of just basic things that I'm very grateful for, I guess, is the encapsulation of that.
Wow. I can feel that. I think like I didn't know you so well before your
Mm-hmm.
injury, but we knew each other before your injury. But I feel like I can feel there's like a depth of character to you that feels very humble. And I would say like gratitude is pretty closely related to humility of just, wow, things are not how I always thought they were. And now I know that because I lived through that in my own skin, and I can appreciate just how things are and how that's also changing too.
Yeah. I think related to that, I feel just very lucky. I don't, there's so many layers of luck that I've had to have had as good of a recovery as I did. And there could be other branches of the multiverse where this just didn't play out this way.
Yeah.
I don't feel like it's like, oh, the reason I recovered so well is because I'm a hard worker. And if you were just a hard worker, then everybody with thoracic outlet syndrome could be just fine. Or
Yeah.
everybody, why doesn't everybody just find an Achilles tendon, return to sport physical therapist, and spend hours, doing their rehab? There's a lot that's been uh, that has lined up for me to make this possible, and so I'm just grateful about some of the circumstantial things, and even just like that, I'm an obsessive person. Like, I didn't choose that; it's just the way I am. But then also
Yeah.
just grateful that like the universe has let my body heal as much as it has. Thanks, universe.
All right, Eric, final question.
Hmm.
Are you back to your wall runs? Where are you at right now?
I am back to so much stuff. I'm back to lifting weights and running and doing parkour and kicking off of walls. I am not gonna see how fast I can run at a wall anymore, though. That
Okay,
that
good.
is something that I just
Got it.
wouldn't recommend. It's too much rolling the dice.
Interesting. Okay,
Yeah.
so you're done with the wall runs.
I'm done with trying to see how fast I can do a wall run.
How
It was a
fast you can
particularly
do. Got
bad
it.
idea. And in general, yeah, I'm not back to everything that I could do at this point. But yeah, continuing to make progress and continuing to sort of just feel out the different ways I can be. I think trying to think of it less as a comeback and more as a transformation.
Oh, amazing. All right, Eric, are there any, I guess I tricked you. That was my last question, but
Uh,
this one will be. Are there any final thoughts that you would like to leave our listeners with?
no, I feel like we covered so much.
Yeah, I'm really grateful for this conversation.
Me too.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's really amazing to be able to talk to you in this way.
I know. Let's do it again.
Sounds good. I'll catch you in like 2 years and we'll see where I'm at with this whole thing.
Alrighty, my friends. That wraps up our conversation with Eric. What did you get from today's conversation? I got so much. Mostly, I want to hear what you're taking away from this. There could be a lot of different takeaways, from the stories we tell ourselves to the strategies for how to deal with unexpected situations. Drop me a comment, leave a review, reply to one of my emails, let me know, and take some time to think about this. It'll make things better. Have a wonderful day, my friend, and I'll catch you on our next episode.